couple of guys joining from home. Hello. Okay. We are on page one. It's 154. Is that? I think we went a little bit. No. No, we're definitely not a 154. No. No, we're a bit. Well, I was right the first time. Huh? A 170 or 169. 169 or 170. Let me find. You didn't have your book last week. That's why you.
Sorry, what did you say? 167, I think.
Sorry, what were you on?
I thought
there we go. End of 167. I recognize it now. Okay, I recognize it because I'm looking at it this afternoon. Okay, perfect. End of 167. Thank you, Jeff. All right. So just to recap, we were talking about walking in front of people during the Amida. Okay, all coming back to me. Isn't that amazing? Okay, so we spoke about the prohibition of walking in front of somebody who's davening their Amida within Dalud Amot, but also not only in front, but we also spoke about, well, not walking, we spoke about sitting last time. We're going to talk about walking this time. But not to, you can take my book because I'm following on the screen if you want. So, so we looked at, you're not supposed to sit within 4 amot of somebody who's doing the Amida, and we said that applies to all 4 amot in all directions. So in theory, somebody who's davening next to you, you shouldn't be sitting down next to them. But we learned last time that there was exceptions for Talmud Torah and Tefillah. So if somebody is davening and they're not up to Shemona Esrei, and somebody gets up next to you, you don't have to, you don't have to get out, right? You don't have to stop. But we saw that there were exceptions when it comes to davening in front, meaning that was all one next to, but to sit in front of somebody who's davening, we said was perhaps a problem. And we're kind of at the end of page 167, the Piskei Teshuvot here, the final lines on page 167, in source 53, the Piskei Teshuvot says, Ucheneged hamit palel, somebody who's in front of somebody who's davening, mamash, like actually in front of them, ein shum heter, afilu chutz dalad amot. He says that there's no, license or permission to sit in front of somebody who's davening, even beyond 4 amot. Which is based on this idea in the Zohar that it's not only within 4 amot, but let's say somebody's davening here, between here and the wall. According to the Zohar, one shouldn't be sitting in front of somebody at all if there's no separation. Ela imken, unless he says hamakom yu'ad atal Torah v'lo letefila klal. Unless it's a makom Torah, like you're in the Beit Midrash and we're having a shir and you're learning, or somebody gets up and davens shachar in front of you, then you wouldn't have to get up because this is a makom Torah, not a makom tefillah. Over the page, uva echad v'ne'amad sham hitpalel. One person gets up and stands there to daven. She'ein birshuto lahafriya v'ligrom l'bitul Torah. Right? They have no permission to disturb and stop you from davening, meaning from learning. If you're learning and one person comes in and davens, that doesn't obligate you to move if it's not a shul, it's a makom Torah. And therefore, we spoke basically that there's prohibition to sit in front of somebody davening, but if it's a makom Torah and someone comes and davens in front of you, you don't have to get up for them if you're already learning there. So like people who come in late and like want to daven at the back of shul when like a shir's going on or something, so you don't have to get up for them. They came in late and they're chapping mincha while the rabbi's giving his drasha, then it's not your problem because now is learning time, not davening time. The Gemara actually talks not only about sitting next to or in front of somebody who's davening, but also passing by somebody. And it brings the following Gemara in Bracha in source 54, where we learn that you're not even supposed to pass within 4 amot, like to walk past somebody. Let's say if somebody's davening, to walk past them while they're davening Amida. So this is learned from the Gemara in Bracha in source 54. Rav Ikra Lebei Geneva. So Rav came to the house of Geneva. V'tzali shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat. He davened on Shabbat. Basically, davened Shabbat. He did early Shabbos. He davened the Shabbos davening be'erev Shabbat, early Shabbat. V'hava matzli Rebbe Yirmiyah bar Abba la'achorei de Rav. And Rebbe Yirmiyah bar Abba was davening behind Rav. V'siyem Rav finished. V'lo piskei letzalutei de Rebbe Yirmiyah. Basically, he didn't take 3 steps back into the tefillah of Rebbe Yirmiyah. In other words, the guy behind him hadn't finished yet, so he didn't take 3 steps back because the guy behind him was still davening. Says the Gemara, Shema mina klal. We learn from this episode 3 halachot. Shema mina, firstly we learn, mitpalel adam shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat. Firstly we learn you can do early Shabbos.
So just to clarify, it means that Rabbi Yirmiyah was also davening early.
Yes, they were all doing early Shabbat, right? So you learn from this incident three stories. Firstly, mitpalel adam shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat. Firstly, you can do early Shabbos. That exists. Ushmami, now we also learn from here. Mitpalel Talmid Acharei Rabbo, that a Talmud, a student, can daven behind their Rebbe. Not considered disrespectful. Just going to mute there. Okay. Ushmami, now we also learn Asul La'avor Keneget Mitpalim, which is what, for our testing purposes, you're not allowed to pass in front of those who are davening. So Rav did not take 3 steps back. Also, Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Abba didn't take 3 steps back. Or Rav didn't take 3 steps into Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Abba's Dalad Amot. That's what we learned from this Gemara.
We also don't know if he's an executor.
Sorry. Well, the assumption is he was, yes. The assumption is from the background context of the story that he was. Otherwise, that second halakha wouldn't make much sense, right? Okay. So we see from here that the Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah say, well, this story was when he was davening in front of him. So this halakha, according to the Rabbeinu Yonah, would only imply in front of somebody, but not next to somebody. So if you're standing next to somebody, in contrast to sitting, where we said it's not respectful, you used to be sitting right next to somebody davening, unless you're also davening, you would be allowed to take 3 steps back next to somebody. It's only if when you're in front of them, you shouldn't take 3 steps back, because that seems to be what the context of the story is. And that's what Rabbeinu Yonah says here in source 55, says to Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah, Asur la'avor keneged hamitpalim, but dafka keneged pneihem. It's only prohibited to pass in front of their faces. Avor b'tzidam, but to their side. Lo chashinan la'avar ba'alma. We're not concerned about passing by. And therefore, according to Rabbeinu Yonah, it's only prohibited, in front of somebody, not to the side, to step back.
So let's say there's a full shore.
Yeah.
We're all facing that way.
Yeah.
And everybody, you're saying behind, everybody in front should not take 3 steps back.
Oh. We'll get to shuls, and also because of the way the shul is built with the stenders, it might be a slightly different story. So we'll see. But in theory, if you're all in a room and there's no stenders, then yeah, you shouldn't be taking 3 steps back into the person behind you.
Right.
Correct. You'd have to wait. You say Yehula Ratzon, and then once you've said that, you can answer everything. We say Osha Shalom, but you can't. But you shouldn't finish off the last bit until they take 3 steps. Right. So, okay. So now the Bet Yosef in the next source brings the Mari Abu Hav, who says again that we see from this that that even if you're outside of 4 amot, you can't then basically step back into somebody into 4 amot. So let's say you are, I don't know, you're 5 amot away from somebody, then you couldn't step back either into 4 amot, even if you're already outside of it. So he brings the Mari Abu Hav in source 56, says the Bet Yosef, Katav Rabbeinu Hagadol Mari Abu Hav Zal. We seem to imply from this story in the Gemara of Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Abba, she'im hishlim tfilato, one finished their davening, adam exactly what you said, Bruce, and there's somebody behind him davening. She'asur is prohibited over the page. Shalosh psiot, to take 3 steps. Until the guy behind him has finished his amida. She'im ya'aseh harahu ka'over keneged hamitpalel. Taking 3 steps back is the same thing as passing in front of somebody who's davening. It would seem and this would be the place, even if the guy behind you started after you, meaning he came in late to shul, and then he gets behind you in the seat behind you, and then he starts, that would apply nonetheless. That you would have to wait. So you look back before you take 3 steps. Right. Okay. But that's what he says. Sorry, you have to have your mirror. You have to do a sure wing that your tefillin mirror, right? Because I have wing mirrors just to daven. So okay. So anyway, that's what's brought, and this is brought lahalacha in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch paskins this way based on what we've seen in the Gemara and the Rishonim. Let's read how the Shulchan Aruch rules in source 57. Asur la'avol keneged hamitpalalim b'toch daled amot. So the Shulchan Aruch says it's prohibited to walk in front of people who are davening within 4 amot. But dafka lifneihem. But as we saw from the Rabbeinu Yonah, it's only to walk in front of them. Avol b'tzideihem, but to the side, muter la'avol v'la'amot. You're allowed to stand or walk past to the side of somebody who's davening. Hey, im hishlim tfilato v'haya adam acher mitpalel acharav. If someone's finished their davening and there was another person davening behind him, asur livsoa gemul psiot. You're not allowed to take your 3 steps back. Ad sheyigmar misha acharav et tfilato, till the guy behind has finished his tefillah. She'im ya'aseh zeh, because if you're doing that, harei hu ka'over keneged mitpalel. It's like walking in front of somebody who's davening. But tzarich l'dakdek b'zeh, you have to be careful about this. Filu im ha'acharon hitchil yitpalel acharav, right? Even if the guy behind started after you, machar shekvar hitchil, after he is already himself is already you yourself already started. So even if the guy comes later than you, you're still supposed to wait for him to finish. What is the reason for all of this? So the Mishnah Berurah here brings two reasons. One is because it disturbs the kavanah of the person behind, and also it's disrespectful to the Shekhinah, because to walk certainly within 4 amot of somebody davening is almost like walking in front of somebody who's talking to the Shekhinah, and you're like sort of walking in front. So if we look in source 58, the Mishnah Berurah brings both of these reasons. Asur la'avor, you're not allowed to pass. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah, because you're disturbing the person's kavanah in this way. And therefore, even if one is reciting Shema, you still wouldn't be allowed to walk in front of someone else davening Amida, because you're disturbing the guy davening. And Chai Adam writes that the reason is because you're interrupting, so to speak, between the person davening and the Shekhinah. So is that a question? No? Okay. All right. Fine. Okay. So that's basically the two reasons given. One is a kavanah related reason, and one is a Shekhinah related reason. And we'll discuss why that is important later on. But first, before we get to that, those two reasons, is it 4 amot in front, or is it 4 amot? You know, if I'm not a horse, I haven't got my blinkers on, so is it just a 4 amot in front of me? Or is it like 4 amot basically in my whole area that I can see? So it's actually machloket between the Elia Rabbah and the Magen Avraham. I think they put this in the book, right? They've got the diagrams. So does it mean literally the 4 amot in front of you, or does it mean anything which is in the sort of my what's it called? My line of sight. I'm forgetting my English. That's the word. Exactly. So is it anything which is in front of me, or just literally in front of me? So he brings both dayot here in the Mishnah Berurah in source 59. Lifneihem, but stadim shelifneihem. What about the sides, meaning diagonals, right? Peripheral vision. Lifneihem in front of them. L'magen Avraham besif katavav kelifneihem dami. It's like in front of them. But Eliyahu Rabbah shari. According to the Eliyahu Rabbah, it's allowed. So he brings both opinions basically there. Okay. Yeah.
People lived in the brother's house and Magen Abraham's house, and how small places were.
Sorry, you want to work out how? Yeah. Can you imagine the davening, waiting for everyone to daven? Right. That's what he does. That's what he says. He brings his machloket, and then there are those that rely on the Eliyahu Rabbah when it's necessary, which we'll see in a minute. But first, he quotes from Eliezer Melamed and the Pnei Halacha, who also brings both of these and talks about not only this, but just also to standing in front of somebody who's done the Amida. Can you come into shul and you want to sort of slot in somewhere, and you sort of stand in front of somebody who's doing the Amida? Even if you're not walking through, you're just going to stand and stop there. So Pnei Halacha discusses this in source 60. So as we saw, there's poskim disagree about where exactly you're not allowed to walk. The data Eliyahu Rabbah is mamash mul panav shebipalel. Eliyahu Rabbah says it's literally the 4 amot in front of the person, right? Why is that the case? Because according to Eliyahu Rabbah, what's the reason you don't walk in front of somebody? Because it's based on kavanah, and therefore he says there, in his opinion, that's where it will disturb somebody. Klomar, that is to say, rochbo shel adam be'erech chetzi meter, about half a meter in front of the person. Lefikach ein la'avor, meaning the width of half a meter, 4 amot length. So basically, we've got a rectangle of half a meter by 2 meters, basically. Lefikach, therefore, ein la'avor ba'oto chatzi meter shamul panav ad lemerchak shel 4 amot kishnei meter. And therefore, within the sort of the width of a person, you shouldn't be walking to 4 amot in front of them. Magen Avraham, according to Magen Avraham, anything which is in the guy's vision, even in the diagonals, you're not allowed to pass it within 4 amot. Because you're going to distract the person davening, because you're still in her line of vision. And there's another machloket. שלדעת אליה רבא, מותר לאדם לבוא ולעמוד לפני המתפלל בתוך 4 אמותיו ולהישאר לעמוד שם. According to Eliyahu Rabbah, you're allowed to actually come in front of the person and stand there. כי רק כשהוא חוצה את 4 אמות. Only when you walk past, שמול פניו, הוא מפריע לו בתפילתו. it says that Elia Rabba, only when you like cross, it's distracting, it's annoying for a person that you walk right in front of them. But if you come from the side, when you're just standing there, that's not such a disturbance. Magen Avraham says you can't even walk in to the 4 amos of somebody, even just to stand there. Okay, so this kind of also has ramifications in terms of we said about taking 3 steps back. The question is, why can't I take 3 steps back in to somebody's vision? According to the Elia Rabbah, as long as I stay there. The assumption is that you're going to be taking steps within the 4 amot. But let's say you were, I don't know, seven amot. As long as the 3rd step is in, according to Elia Rabbah, it would be allowed. But if it's the 1st or 2nd step, you wouldn't be allowed to step in because you'd be moving within the 4 amot of the person's vision. Okay, and there's some lovely diagrams for you. Okay, so based on all of this, so they quote here that Isha Yisrael quotes the Tzurba of Chaim Kanievsky's Zatzal, that says that if you're davening in front of somebody, you can take these, in cases of need, you can take 3 steps back, basically to the side. So if somebody's in front of you, or you're in front of somebody, sorry, you can take 3 steps back sort of diagonally. And that way to rely on the opinion. And that's what he says here in source 61. But Mishnah Bura Simon Kuf Vav Sif Katan Yutet. So Kuf Bet Simon Katan Yutet Katav, he says, the Im Hamit Palel Eino La'acharav Mamash. If the guy's not directly behind him, then you can take 3 steps back, but he does add behind him a shat. It's only if you really need to take 3 steps back. But you have to see. Im hamit palel mamash acharav. If the guy's literally behind him, can you take your 3 steps back on a diagonal? The dat Eli Rabbah. Is it better to take 3 steps back to the diagonal, or is it better to take 3 really small steps back so you don't go into the guy's 4 amot? So Rav Chaim Kanievsky answered, Tshuva, yachol lifsor ba'alachson. You take 3 steps back at an angle, and that way you don't go into the 4 amot of the person behind you. Okay, and that's what he says. The Alkut Yosef said not to do this though. Rav Yitzchak Yosef says you should not be taking steps diagonally back, and you should wait for the person behind you to finish. So he disagrees with Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and he says in source 62, Im hishlimet tfilato, if you finish your amida, vaya adam acher mitpalel acharav, and someone else is davening behind him, asur lifsor gimel psiot, he's not allowed to take 3 steps back, ad sheyigmor misha acharav et tfilato, until the person behind him has finished his tefillah. She'im yifsa, because if he takes 3 steps, if he takes steps back, nimsa over keneged mitpalel, it's like he's walking in front of him. Afilu im zeh she'acharav ma'arich arbe b'tfilato. What if the guy behind you is really schlepping out his amida, right? It's always one, right? He's always schlepping out his amida. Still, ein lahakel lifsar kenegdo. You should not be lenient to step in front of him, even if he's schlepping out. V'yesh mekilim, he does acknowledge there are those who are lenient. B'chai gavna im posel studying. Or those who are lenient allow you to take 3 steps to the side, which is what we just saw in Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Or bifrat b'zaken or chola, especially the person's unwell or elderly and they need to sit down. Or mishatash kocho b'mechat somot, somebody who's weak on a fast day as well. So in times of need, he says there are those who would allow it, but he himself isn't lenient, but he's basically saying one who is lenient has what to rely on. That's usually how he presents it. He presents what he thinks is halakha, and he'll say it, that those who are lenient, but he doesn't bring it as what he thinks is the primary opinion. And you see this. He says, like he's not mezalzel this halakha. Takes it seriously. He says the next bit when it comes to duchening, it's better that a Kohen doesn't wash their hands before duchening than have to take 3 steps back into somebody doing the Amida to go wash their hands to make it in time for duchening. This is what he says in source 63 there. Kohen harotz, I can see Peter's watching. So Kohen harotz lisak kapav ubichdei litolet yadav kodem nisiat kapayim sarich la'avol lefnei pilel. Somebody who Kohen wants to go duchen, and in order to wash their hands, they have to take 3 steps back into somebody. Yesh lahorot lo lisa et kapav b'lo ntilat yadayim. It's better he should tell him to duchen without washing his hands. And rely on the fact that in the morning before davening, he already washed his hands. However, what if the guy is more than 4 amot away, behind him, but it's more than 4 amot? Over the page. Then he can pass in front of such a person, more than 4 amot. You shouldn't be concerned for the Zohar. Remember, the Zohar has the opinion that you should never walk in front of somebody, even if it's more than 4 amot. He says, certainly in this case, no one should be concerned for the opinion of the Zohar. So you can walk more than 4 amot in front of somebody to go wash your hands. His psak here to allow a Kohen to wash their hands without going to wash them is when you can assume that he definitely hasn't touched anywhere on his body or whatever that would require him to actually wash his hands. Because obviously then he couldn't do it. But otherwise, he says, if he knows his hands are clean, he should not take 3 steps back into somebody's 4 amot in order to duchen. It would be better that they go and duchen without washing their hands, which is it's quite a sort of radical view because we're usually very careful with duchening,
At the kotel, I was going to say at the kotel on Chol HaMoed.
Yes.
You can't take 3 steps back. You can't take half a step back anyway. And there's no, whenever you're duchen at the kotel, you never wash your hands anyway. You wash your hands when you go into the kotel, and that's it.
And
Once
then you're very
you can't
careful
get
not
out.
to touch your shoes or anything between then and or whatever, scratch your head or anything between then and yeah.
And let me tell you, duchening at the kotel when it's a little colder is you feel sorry for the Kohanim in the old days because it's a little chilly underfoot.
Okay. Yes, to say that. Okay, let's go on. Let's have a look at the Piskei Teshuvot to give a few other examples. Yes. Yeah.
I was going to ask, what is there a shiur for this 3 steps back? Is there a shiur for a step? Is it a amma, for instance?
Usually not strictly speaking. People tend to do a foot, but like a 1 foot length, but not like a no, because that was what Rav Kanievsky was asked in Tshuva. Is it better to take 3 tiny steps back or to take 3 steps to the left? He said that to the side. He said better to take 3 steps to the side than to do sort of fake steps. So we do take steps, but we're not so like mukpid on the shiur. At least in our
in today's type of shiur, like take Beit Yehuda, then you just don't. It's
narrow.
It's narrow.
Yeah. Well, when they rebuild the shorts, we'll have a think about that. Okay. All right. So let's have a look at the Piskei Teshuvot in source 64. He brings some other examples of when it is that one would be allowed to pass within 4 amot of somebody davening. He talks here about if there's a mitzvah which is going to be missed if you don't do it, which, by the way, is in contrast to what we just saw in the Yalkut Yosef, because he disagrees and he says that to duchen, to go wash your hands for duchening, you maybe would be allowed to take 3 steps back. So the Piskei Teshuvot disagrees with the Yalkut Yosef. And so let's look at the other examples he brings in source 64. These are the cases in which they allowed one to pass in front of somebody davening. L'tzorech mitzvah overet, for a mitzvah which is going to pass if you don't do it now. Kogon lihitpalel b'tzibur, like to go daven with a minyan. Not really sure what the case is, but let's say you had to go out to shul to happen early Mariv somewhere. I don't know what it is. Ukamoken and the like. Kohen l'tzorech aliyato l'duchan. A kohen has to go up to the duchan. Va'af kedei litol yadav lifnechen, even to go wash his hands. So you see there that Rabinovich he disagrees with the Yalkut Yosef on this, and he says that to go wash your hands would be reason to allow you to take 3 steps back. He goes on, mishum, another reason, not just to do a mitzvah which is going to pass, but also mishum kavod habriut, human dignity. You're allowed to walk in front of someone davening. Somebody has to go to the bathroom. Very important. Kid is crying, right, or disturbing. If you take them out the shul, you don't say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm stuck," because everyone around me is davening. You can walk in front for that case. Other disturbances in tefillah as well. There are even certain cases which we discussed in the previous couple of weeks where you'll even allow the guy himself who's davening to leave. Let's say something's disturbing him. He himself could move in the middle of Amida. Kavachomer, that you can actually walk in front of someone else. Yesha Kotvim, he goes on the final paragraph there. There are those that write, Lelamed Schut, to try and defend the practice of those, to allow people to walk in front of people who've put their talit over their faces. But when they daven. In other words, remember we saw that they can't see you, remember? But remember we saw that there were 2 reasons the Mishnah Berurah brought about why you shouldn't walk in front of someone davening. One was because of kavana,
Yeah.
and the other one was because of the shechina. It's not respectful, like you're walking.
Right.
So if his eyes are closed, so you've dealt with the kavana reason. His eyes closed anyway, or let's say they're covered with a talit, but you haven't dealt with the shechina reason. So he says there are those who want to defend it because at least according to one reason it's okay. So that's just an important point to notice that would be a time of need. Somebody's standing in a place where it's not designated for tefillah. Right, he's in the public gangway, he's in the aisle. Then what's the halacha there? It's his fault for davening in the aisle. He's not allowed to prevent the people from passing by. So if somebody decides to daven the Amida in that gangway or in front of the door, that's their fault, and you can't stop other people. Because again, if they choose to place themselves in a place which is not designed for that sort of tefillah, then it would not apply. I think we miss the makar? Maybe we did it. We spoke about it last time very briefly because you mentioned about Beit Yehuda, just to end off this little section about. So in a shul where you've got 10 tfachim, like you've got the stender. So assuming the stender is either 80 centimeters or 96 centimeters tall, and it goes across, that could in theory act as a barrier. So again, it would depend on your two. It would depend on your two reasons of the Mishnah Berurah, which is that if it's about the shechina where you've got a barrier, a halachic barrier, a wall of 10 tfachim, either 80 centimeters or 96, whatever. There's different opinions. And if it's kavanah related, it might still disturb the person. So if the person behind you doesn't mind, and you've got a stender behind you, then he says it doesn't affect his kavanah, or he has his eyes closed, or whatever it is, then, or is looking in the siddur, then maybe there's room if there's a stender behind you to it, which is high enough to say, well, okay, then I can take 3 steps back. So in a shul where there's fixed seats, to answer the question, wouldn't have to wait for everyone if you've got a shul with seats, if it doesn't disturb the person behind you, and you've got a stender which is 10 tefachim tall.
Well, that means you've got enough room, theoretically, if you was a stender, put a stender to one side.
But then why? But then the guy in front. So the question is if you need to do that, right? If you don't need to do that, but it's enough of a barrier for the person walking in front of you.
Sure.
So, it's a really nice. We'll read it. We've got some time. We'll look here at the Machshava section. We don't usually do that, but it's a really nice piece of the Rambam in the Moreh. It gives good. Rav Kapach actually, in Rav Kapach's version of the Rambam, he quotes this piece of the Rambam in Chelek Gimel Perek Nun Aleph is like a very important piece of Rambam. He talks about the importance of tefillah, and this is a very big piece of Rambam here, source 65. The Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim talks about the need that tefillah should be kavanah, it shouldn't just be lip service basically. And he says here, the Rambam in the Moreh, source 65, Aval im titpalel b'hana'at svatecha. If you're just somebody who davens by moving your lips, ufanecha el hakota, and your face is facing the wall, but all you're thinking about is your business and your business dealings. The tikraba Torah, or what about somebody who's reading from the Torah? Shoncha with your mouth or your tongue, but your heart is occupied with thinking about the reconstruction work you've got going on in your house. Without sort of thinking about what you're actually reading. And similarly, anytime if you just do a mitzvah, but you're just doing it with your avarim, you're doing a mitzvah with your limbs. And he brings, what's the analogy he brings famously? Just like somebody who's digging a hole in the ground. Or somebody who's just chopping down wood in the forest, chopping down trees, without thinking about what he's actually doing. You're not thinking about the person who commanded you to do it, nor the reason of what you're doing. If you're just somebody, you're practicing Jew, but you're not, you don't think about what you're doing. Don't think that you've reached the purpose of life. You'll just be like somebody about whom it was written in Yirmiyahu, that you are near, meaning God, you are near to them in their mouths, meaning they say how much they want you, they daven, they do all the emotions, but far from the klayot, the kidneys, meaning the innards. that they're far from within. In other words, so you're doing the actions, you're going through the motions, but God, you're far from within their hearts. You're not really within their hearts. So the Rambam gives Musar about the importance of that the action is supposed to lead to a kavanah. Not supposed to just daven just for the action of davening, but it's supposed to be accompanied with the appropriate thoughts about who you're davening to and what the purpose of what you're doing is as well. He also quotes here another great piece from the Chovot Halavavot as well regarding tefillah, and talks about, very vivid terms about somebody who davens without kavanah is like a body without a neshama, basically. So he says here in 66, somebody davens with their tongue, but their heart is occupied with matters which are nothing to do with davening. It's like your tefillah is a body without a soul. Right? It's like he says was it a husk without a kernel? Your body's there, but your heart's not there. If your heart's not there in tefillah, then the tefillah is basically empty and hollow inside. So it's just a couple of perspectives of machshava about the importance of kavanah in tefillah. And that these halachot really should be indicating that for us. So, our kavanah is supposed to be so much so that if somebody were to walk in front of us, it would disturb our kavanah. Okay, so let's move on now, I think, to the next perek. Whoops.
Alternatively, you could say that your kavanah is such that you're so engrossed in the tefillah that you don't notice anything else.
So such a person, I said, if you've got that and you've got a shtender, then you're good to go and take 3 steps back, because then you've neutralized both reasons that the Mishnah Berurah gave. So. Okay, so let's talk now about tefillah b'tzibur on page 191, davening with a minyan. Okay, so what is the idea of davening with the minyan, and what are the virtues of davening with the minyan? So to start out with, we're going to have a look at these gemarot, or the longer gemara here in Brachot, which talks about the virtues of davening in a shul, and also not just a shul, but also with a minyan. So let's have a look at this gemara in Brachot. There's quite, they bring some of it, but if you look there and actually in Masechet Brachot, there's quite a few gemara which all talk about the virtues of davening with a tzibur, as opposed to on one's own. So says the Gemara there in Brachot in source 1. Amalei Rabbi Yitzchak Rav Nachman. My time lo atimar lebeik nishtelet sloye. So Rav Nachman wasn't in shul one day, and Rabbi Yitzchak said, "Why didn't you come to shul to daven today?" Amalei said to him, "Lo yachilna, I wasn't able to come." Amarlei said to him, "Kanfei lemar asar v'litzlei." So why didn't you get 10 people to make a minyan in your house? Okay, you can't make it to shul, so have a minyan in your house. Amarlei said to him, "Trichali milta, that's too difficult for me to do." But then maybe you should at least tell the leader of the congregation. But in the dematzli tzibura leiti v'lodoy lamar. Tell me what time you're going to daven, and that way I'll daven. At least I won't daven with a minyan, but at least I'll daven at the same time that they're davening in the shul, and I'll align my tefillah at home to the time that they're davening in shul. Amar lei, he said to him, "My kulehai, what's the problem? Why is it so important?" Amalei said that I'm Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, because Rabbi Yochanan says the name Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. My dichtiv, what does it mean when it says into Hilim? Va'ani tefilati lacha Hashem et ratzon, and as for me, may my prayer to you be at an et ratzon, a time of goodwill. Eimata et ratzon, when's the time of ratzon, of goodwill, good fortune? B'shashet tzibur mitpalalim, at the hour, the time when the community is davening. There are special virtues of davening with community, which generates an 8th ratzon. Tanya Nami Hachi, in fact, we've already learned this in a brighter. Rabbi Natan said, how do we know that Hashem does not reject the prayers of the community, of when you daven with a minyan? As it says, Hen kel kabir v'lo yimas, mighty God who will never push off or despise or reject. And it also says, Padab shalom nafshi mikarevli, that Hashem has redeemed my soul so that no one can basically come against me. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, what do we learn from here? Says the Brighter. Says God, Kol ha'osek b'Torah v'milut chasadim, anyone who learns Torah and does acts of kindness, umit palel im hatzibur, and davens with the congregation, I attribute to such a person as if they have redeemed me. Liva livni, as if me and my children, Labanai, meaning Bnei Israel, Biben Umat Ha'olam, from among the nations of the world. Because again, that pasuk says, Hadash b'shalom nafshi mikarev li, that God has redeemed, basically been redeemed through tefillah. That there's some sort of power in tefillah, but tzibur, davening with the minyan, which just transcends things, and God automatically accepts the tefillot. And in contrast to tefillah b'yichidut, davening on one's own simply doesn't reach that level. It quotes here, just by the by, also just a very quick line in Masechet Avodah Zarah in source 2 over the page. Again, this idea that when davens with a tzibur, nefishas chutei, the zchuyot, the merits are greater. And davening with a tzibur has greater merits than davening on one's own. Okay, so clearly there's this virtue of davening with a minyan. The Rambam also writes about this and the importance of davening with a minyan as well. And he says somebody who doesn't daven with a minyan is a shachen ra, is an evil neighbor, because they're missing out basically davening the community and having the tefillot of the whole community as one go up to Shemayim. So this is the Rambam Hilchot Tefillah here in source 3. Sorry, pretty rough. Just wait till you get to the others. Okay, let's see. So he says here in source 3, Tefillat tzibur nishmat tamid. The prayer of the community is always heard. Va'afilu hayu behen chotin. Even this is the virtues of tefillah in the community. Even if there were chotin, even if there were sinners in the community, ein hakadosh baruch hu mo'es b'tefillatan shel rabim. Like we just saw in the Gemara and Brachot, God does not reject or despise the tefillah of the community, of the congregation. Lefikach tzarich adam lishatef atzmo im hatzibur. Therefore, a person should unite themselves with the community to daven. V'lo yitpalel b'yachid kol zman sheyachol yitpalel hatzibur. A person should not daven on their own as long as they're able to daven with the congregation. U'le'olam yashkim adam v'yarev lebeit hakneset. A person should go up early in the morning and also in the evening for Mariv to go to shul. Because only in the shul is a person's tefillah heard at all times. Anyone who has a shul in their city and doesn't daven with the congregation in it, nikra shachen ra, is called a bad neighbor. That's what the Rambam has to say about the virtues of tefillah, but also criticizing those who don't use a shul if they have it in their town. The lashon, the terminology of the Shulchan Aruch, is particularly interesting as we go to look at the next section, which is davening with a minyan, not only is it encouraged and the right thing to do, but is it actually a halachic requirement?
You missed the line.
What did I miss?
It said, if possible, if not, you don't go to shul, you should at least daven at the same
Well,
time.
So let's read that inside. We're going to read it inside now. So let's see it in source 4.
Oh,
He was giving an introduction to source 4. You jumped the gun. Oh, good. Let's see it inside in source 4.
fuck, who's done that?
Sorry. define what possible is though. So let's have a look in source 4. This is very important for us to infer the precise terminology Shulchan Aruch uses, which is the question is how he understands the obligation of davening with a minyan. Says the Shulchan Aruch in source 4, Yishtadel Adam litpalel b'beit hakneset im hatzibur. A person should try to daven in shul with a minyan. Who anus, if he's he's anus, he can't help it. There's exceptional circumstances. She'eino yachol lavo lebeit hakneset, such that he can't come to shul. Then yechavel lehitpalel b'shah shetzibur palim. He should at least daven at the time the community is davening. Okay, so that's how the Shulchan Aruch rules. So the question for us to try and unpack now, in the time that's left to us, is what does it mean yishtadel adam? A person should try. Like shakoach, we're trying to be good Jews, but like, what does it mean you should try? Like whenever you see that lashon, like yishtadel, like you should try to, try to give tzedakah, you should try to keep Shabbat. So what does it mean a person should try to daven with the community? What does this mean about the level of the obligation of davening with a minyan? And that's what we're going to look at in the next section. Right? Is tefillah with the minyan actually required or not? Because on the one hand, again, he writes yishtadel, which implies you should try, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. Same time, he says only somebody who's anus, only somebody who, due to really extreme circumstances, can't come, is okay, and they should daven at the time of davening. Implying, so what about the middle ground? So the Igrot Moshe Feinstein is clear that, of course, even according to the Shulchan Aruch, it was an absolute requirement to daven with a minyan. If you've got a minyan in town, you are obligated to daven with a minyan. And simply, again, so the question of minyan. And the question is, well, how does he understand yishtadel? So the Rav Moshe Feinstein here will understand yishtadel means that even like don't rely on halachic exceptions. Oh, I have a mitzvah to do, so I can't do it. No, yishtadel. Don't find excuses, halachic excuses, why you can't do it. Oh, I've got another mitzvah to do at that hour. No, yishtadel, you should nonetheless try and always come to shul. Of course, it's a halachic requirement, but you shouldn't even put other mitzvot in its place. So let's see this inside. In source 5 says that Moshe Feinstein, Hinei lehit palel ba'asara hu chiyuv mitzvah al ha'adam, v'lo rak hidur ma'ala ba'alma. So he says very clearly that davening with a minyan is an obligation on the person. It's not just a hidur, a beautification of the mitzvah, or a special level. Dehal leperush Rashi Psachim b'chulin mechuyav lelech im ad daled milim kshehu lefanav b'holech b'derech. Right? He quotes here the Gemara of Rashi. According to Rashi, who says that for davening, you're supposed to walk up to 4 mil, about 4 kilometers in search of a minyan. You're supposed to go forward. But if somebody is on a journey, even this is traveling. Somebody who's traveling, even if it's better than to sleep where they are. Not only that, but if there's a shul a kilometer behind you, then you have to turn around and go the wrong way, up to a kilometer, up to a mil. But Nifsat came with Shulchan Aruch. From here it's clear. From here it's clear that you've got to go at least a mil in search of a shul. So if you've got a shul within a mil of your house, about a kilometer, then you're obligated to go. At the very least. That's what the Rosh Feinstein says. And he says, don't learn out from the Shulchan Aruch who uses the word yishtadel, that there's no obligation. He says in the next paragraph, ve'en ledayek, and don't try and infer milashon from the terminology that the Shulchan Aruch used, yishtadel adam hitpalel beit hakneset im hatzibur shebesifteh. The fact he says you should try, lomar, to say shurak ma'ila ba'alma, it's just a good thing to do. That's not true. The gamal chiyuv shayach l'shon zeh. Even on something which is an actual obligation, you can still use this terminology yishtadel. One should try. Because since one is exempt, if the shul is more than a mil away, more than a kilometer away, they're exempt. Then you should compare other burdens that present themselves to you, basically the equivalent of more than a mil. That's why a person, it's the Shulchan Aruch says yishtadel. Some things are bothersome for you to do, but for others they're not so bothersome. Therefore, amar l'shon yishtadel adam. That's why the Shulchan Aruch says somebody should try. Should attempt. Yishtadel, to attempt to try. Kavanahu, because the idea is over the page. Shelo yakel lidmot kol tircha letircha. So yoter mil. You shouldn't say, oh, every little thing I have is a tircha, an inconvenience such that I can't go to shul, like it's the equivalent of having to go back a mil if you were to walk. Ella rather yachmir b'harbe. You should be extra careful and stringent in this regard. You should really assess it seriously before you say I've got something else on to go to shul. But of course, it's an obligation to go to shul. And he says within a mil. Now, there are many who say that a mil, that doesn't just mean in terms of distance. So a mil, they say, is about 18 minutes. But that means driving. So if there's a shul within 18 minutes driving, that's also in theory an obligation. But it's a unit of time perhaps as well. Like that, if there's a shul within 18 minutes of you, even if it's by car, obviously not on Shabbos, but like if it's within 18 minutes of you, then nowadays with a car, it's hard to say, oh, it's 2 kilometers away, but it's a 7-minute drive, and it's not a big deal. It's within a mil in that regard. Aruch HaShulchan similarly says it seems to be a chiyuv, an obligation to go to a minyan. In source 6, Hadar b'yishuv toch mil makom shemipalim ba'asara. If you live in a town that there's a shul within a mil of your house, chayav leilech b'chol yom boker ve'erev lehitpalel b'tzibur. You have to go morning and evening to go daven with the community. It's obvious that you shouldn't wake up for a non-mitzvah purpose, just for leisure, to leave a town where there's a shul Even if you're going to go before shacharit, before it's light outside. So even though obligation of shacharit hasn't yet started. And the fact that we're not careful about this is because he says that people weren't makpid in his town basically to do this, and they would not go to shul in the week. It's because they've got to go to work because of our parnasa. It's because they consider going to work to be a mitzvah. Why? It's a mitzvah to support your family. The ishtoch has the obligation for one to support one's wife, right, as in the Tzurba. And also regarding one's children, Chazal said, about this person, it says, happy are those who do tzedakah at all times. So he tries to justify the minhag of people who get up early to go to work, that is a dvar mitzvah, to try and justify why they will not maybe go to shul, because going to support your family is a mitzvah. But just for a dvar reshut, you shouldn't leave before you've davened. You shouldn't leave the town before you've davened. However, they quote here of Abba Shaul in the Old Tzion, who says that, strictly speaking, it's not an obligation to daven in a minyan. And he says in the Old Tzion, source 7, that it's a midat chasidut basically, but it's not, strictly speaking, an obligation. And he says there in source 7 in the Old Tzion, it would seem, since it's not a total obligation, like we saw in the Shulchan Aruch where he says, Yishtadel Adam Palel, a person should try to daven Beit HaKnesset im Tzibur. You should not daven early mincha, basically, which is b'diavad according to some poskim. We'll discuss it later on. In order to daven with a minyan. Ella rather yitpalel mincha katana b'yachid. It's better to daven mincha, which is in the later afternoon. There's a machloket about whether you can daven mincha gedola, which is from sort of around 12:30 p.m., but like just half an hour after chatzot, or it's best to daven from mincha katana, which is 2.5 hours before shkia, and those who hold you should best to daven 2.5 hours before shkia. And he would say if you want to hold such a way, then it's best to daven mincha gedola without a minyan, to mincha katana without a minyan, than to daven early mincha with a minyan. We're not going to discuss mincha now; that will be discussed later on. But nonetheless, we see from here that there's this idea that for him, tefillah is not in a minyan is not strictly speaking a requirement. So yeah, so that's what we see. So he disagrees.
Different rules for chakras and marrow.
So no, he would say the same thing about all tefillah. It's just he has a unique understanding in that you shouldn't daven mincha gedola, you should only do mincha katana, and you should do mincha later on in the day, which we're not going to go into now. But during that, in the midst of that discussion, he discusses the essential obligation of tefillah but tzibur, and he says there's no strictly speaking obligation to daven with a minyan. However, we saw the Aruch HaShulchan disagreed, Rav Moshe Feinstein disagreed, and that even they would concede that you're only obligated to go find a shul which is up to the distance of a mil. So let's have a look. This is based on the Shulchan Aruch here in source 8 in Siman Sadi. Says the Shulchan Aruch here in source 8. Somebody's going on a way. The Hegia Le'ir, and they reach a town. The person wants to stay there. Im lefanav ad dalet minim makom shimpalin be. So if in front of him, so but mipalim beyud, there's somebody where that you could daven with a minyan 4 mil in front of you. So you're on the Great Ocean Road and you've got a journey, whatever. And then if you go another 4 mil on your journey, that there'll be a shul there. You have to go forward an extra 4 kilometers basically. And even to turn back, you have to go back up to a mil. A mil is 200. Is 2,000 amal. Sorry, about a kilometer. Sorry. So there, he's talking about somebody who's not in the town. So the question is, what does this mean about somebody every single day? But the implication from there is that this is what you should be doing, right? And if you're living in a town, so that's exactly Moshe Feinstein's argument. If you're living in a town, then you should at least be made inconvenienced to go up to a mil, which is about a kilometer, to go find a minyan. And that's what he holds. And that's what the Mishnah Berurah there says, because he was talking about someone on a journey. Mishnah Berurah says exactly your point in source 9. But Hayoshev Veiton, somebody who's living in the town, sitting in his house, do you know Kumala Acharav? right? So it's the equivalent of somebody who would have to go back. So at least up to a mil. Anyone who lives in a town within a kilometer, within a mil of somebody where there's a minion, you need to go every day and daven with a minion. That's what it would seem to be. Rosh Feinstein said it's what the Aruch HaShulchan said for a Dvar Mitzvah there'd be room, and he tried to justify the minhag of going to work to support family when there's no alternative for an early minion or whatever might be also a mitzvah. Because based on what we saw in what the Shulchan writes in general, because the Shulchan Aruch only wrote it in somebody who's Yotzei Derech, somebody who's on a journey, they should keep going. But he seemed to imply, but it's difficult. You're right. But he said the Yishtadel meant that in general, the day to day, how much. He said it's still the right thing to do, but it's not a clear black and white obligation. Okay, so are you ever allowed to go on a journey? Are you ever allowed to travel? So they quote here as Zalman Chaim Goldberg, right? Quoting the Halichot Shlomo, right? About that you can go on a journey even if you might not have access to the minyan during the trip. And he basically cites the Baal HaMa'ar, who says that the Baal HaMa'ar, we're going to see over the page, learns out that you're allowed to go on a boat. Well, not actually the Baal HaMa'ar inside. I think we're just going to see the Shulchan Aruch inside. But you're allowed to go on a boat 3 days before Shabbat, even though there's a chance that on Shabbat itself you'll have to do Chilul Shabbat according to the Baal HaMa'ar to save the boat, because you're going to have to play with the sails and the oars to stop the boat from sinking or whatever it is. You're allowed to put yourself in a position where, even though it will ultimately require you to break Shabbat, but it's allowed for Pikuach Nefesh. So said Ram Nechemia, then maybe the same thing is true with a minyan. You're allowed to go on holiday to someone that's not going to be a minyan, because you weren't obligated that tefillah yet when you went on the holiday. So if we look at source 10, this is where it comes from, about somebody who's going out on a journey on a boat. So he says there in source 10, Tzurba Shiur, somebody who's going on a caravan on a journey in the desert. And everyone knows it's dangerous in those days, especially going across the desert, and they're going to have to break Shabbat. By going into the desert on Shabbat, they're going to have to keep walking on Shabbat and breaking Shabbat. They're prohibited to leave 3 days before Shabbat because they're probably still going to be in the desert on Shabbat. But on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, you can go out into the desert. And if afterwards it happens to be that you're on the way and you're stuck there for Shabbat, you have to break Shabbat to save a life. Mutter, it's allowed, but it's not considered Shabbat desecration. Meaning, if you put yourself in a situation of Chilul Shabbat, it's okay, because you didn't do it wrong. Once you're in the situation, you're obligated to break Shabbat to save a life. And therefore, from there, maybe we can learn somebody who actively goes to a place where there's no minyan, it would not be a problem, because when you put yourself in the situation, now the situation arises, there's no minyan around within the mill, so okay, there's no minyan. But you're allowed to put yourself in the situation. Now, those who disagreed and said that no, this was the Shulchan Aruch and the Baal HaMa'ar only said this regarding Chilul Shabbat because it's Pikuach Nefesh, it's saving a life. But maybe you shouldn't be putting yourself into a place where there's no minyan, ideally.
Yeah, and there's also a qualification. The examples that they give, you can't do it if it's less than 3 days before Shabbat. So it's not
Because then you know you're going to get stuck. Yeah. Right. But the point is that the thing is, everyone agrees. I think everyone agrees. And the conclusion of Halichot Shlomo, the conclusion, this was almost out of time, the conclusion of the Zalman Chaim Goldberg is that you shouldn't plan to travel to a place with no minyan unless there's proper reasons to go. Parnasa, health, some sort of mitzvah-related activity. So like family holiday, so you can work out if it's necessary and stuff like that. But my point is that everyone concedes to use this. If this were true, none of us could be in Australia, because we've all been on a plane and we've all missed minyanim to get here. Now, if it was true that you wouldn't be allowed to go anywhere. So everyone agrees that there are cases where you have to miss a minyan. It's just a question of how far you take it. Meaning, do I go away to Queensland? Sorry? So do I go on a cruise trip for a month with no other Jews and say, I'll be potter? Or do I feel bad? Or do I say, let's try and, get a couple of families together, or, or if we're going to go away, let's try and come back for Shabbos or something, or whatever it is, so that's really what we learn from here. The idea is just to think about it essentially a little bit in terms of right. I hear what you're saying. That's the precedent he wanted to draw from. But I think what we all concede that there are cases when we do, everyone will have to miss a minyan at some point, and then the question is just how far we take that. How far do we look? Does every do we look for a family holiday and think, well, maybe here there might be a minyan, or let's try and limit the number of Shabbatot we miss, or the like. And it should be something which is on our mind. I think it should be the conclusion, certainly from reading through this. Right. If somebody's in Avel, suddenly then they feel it, right? Like, sorry. No, I'm saying because of Kaddish, you're saying. So I think we'll stop here, and we'll, please God, continue next week, Bezat Hashem. Right, tomorrow, Rabbi Roselaw is giving lunch and learn at 1 for those who are around, and in the city at 1, and there's a communal share on Thursday night at 8:30 p.m. It's on an interesting topic. I forgot the exact topic. It was on what Jewish homes will look like. Can single women doing IVF and sperm banks and that sort of thing, and posthumous paternity, like using like Tzurba. So that'll be an interesting sharing over the next few days. Okay, we will stop there for Ma'ariv. Shakach. Right.